Back in Leavenworth, a second engine was attached to the front of the train. This engine helped pull the train up through Tumwater Canyon, along Nason Creek, past Bern, and up to the Cascade Tunnel Station at the foot of the East Side Switchbacks. A depot, an engine roundhouse and turntable for turning locomotives and snowplows, an electric substation and motor shed, a few cottages, a bunkhouse for train crews, and a number of makeshift shacks created by removing the wheel trucks from the bottoms of old boxcars. The bulk of its wintertime population consisted of crews of transient snow shovelers, typically down on their luck types, recruited from places like Skid Row in Seattle. Cascade Tunnel Station was, in short, a rough workaday and sometimes unsavory place, even under a forgiving blanket of snow. Stevens Pass is named for John F. Stevens, an engineer in the employ of the Great Northern Railway. He had located the route the railway took over the Rockies, Arias Pass, and he had found the route over his eponymous pass, not an ideal route, but workable, and James Jerome Hill had little time to waste. This narration can't help but be a bit anachronistic, as there were 3 different attempts to establish an acceptable route over the Cascades. We are interested in the first route, the path Mark Twain and Company traveled in 1895. This first route over Stevens Pass required 8 switchbacks, sharp curves, steep grades of up to 4%, and a crew of 3,000 men working 12 hours a day for 2 years to complete. The final spike was driven on January 6, 1893, and Mark Twain traveled this route August 8, 1895, riding the Great Northern Railway from Spokane to Seattle. He rode on the engine with the engineer, who was delighted. Arriving at Cascade Tunnel Station at about 7 a.m., a third locomotive was attached to the rear of the train. Mark was allowed a seat in the point helper, the engine added in Leavenworth. There were 2 men in this engine, an engineer and a fireman, and a vacant seat behind the fireman on the left side. The train backed up into the first switch, then started forward again along Stevens Creek for a short distance, before making a sharp turn and returning to Nason Creek and up the second east side spur. Soon after the Great Northern reached Seattle, much of America suffered the panic of 1893. It was devastating to many established businesses, but proved a boon to the new businesses along the line. J.J. Hill had been very busy extending the advice of Horace Greeley to continue on west. This helped provide a renewed supply of labor to develop, among other places, Skykomish Valley, just west of the Switchbacks. The earlier transcontinental railroads had employed cheap Chinese labor, upsetting unemployed whites, resulting in the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1881, a federal law barring Chinese from entering the United States to work on railroads. Hill had been negotiating with the Japanese. He wished to sell them U.S. goods and import silk and tea. It's also possible he was able to procure cheap Japanese labor, although this is not documented. The 1900 census mentions 47 Japanese workers in Wellington and Martin Creek, but it does not mention the town of Nippon. Driving in reverse, the train follows Stevens Creek over the pass to a spur overlooking Wellington on the Tai River. Whether a town was located for mining or for the railroad, they all had sawmills. There was a definite local market for lumber, but J.J. Hill knew there was a much bigger market in the east. Hill knew he could only make money if he could fill his freight cars in both directions. In addition to products from the Orient, he recognized the Great Northern could transport lumber east on cars that would otherwise travel empty. He convinced his friend and neighbor, Frederick Weyerhaeuser, to look to the west with him. Even after construction, the railroad remained labor-intensive. The large crews needed to build the line became large maintenance and snow removal crews. The route over Stevens Pass was hardly ideal, with 8 switchbacks and sections of track above 3,000 feet in a serious snow belt. Snaking rail cars and 8-car units up and down the switchbacks required crews working around the clock. Work began on the first Cascade Tunnel in 1897 and was completed in 1900. It relieved the railroad of the switchbacks, but brought its own set of problems, particularly the exhaust from the steam engines, causing several deaths in the tunnel and numerous close calls. Forward again to a spur at the head of the Tai River Canyon. By 1909, the tunnel had become electrified and electric engines pulled the trains through the tunnel. But the line was still in dangerous snow country. In March of 1910, the most disastrous avalanche in U.S. history occurred at Wellington. 96 people died when an avalanche crashed into a stalled train. The train backs up to a second spur above Wellington. In 1929, the Great Northern Railway completed the construction of the second Cascade Tunnel, 7.8 miles long and still in operation. This tunnel had disastrous effects on the town of Leavenworth, bypassed by the new route. Now forward again, up along the Tai River, then across and along the face of the Siberian Elephant Mountain. Navigating the switchbacks employed specially trained crews and required so much tractive effort that each locomotive consumed over 3,000 pounds of coal. The 12-mile route would sometimes be completed in 75 minutes or less, or as much as 36 hours. Engines at both ends, monsters. We had the brakes on and both engines pulling backwards. Precipitous. Known as Death Mountain during construction, the switchbacks operated for 7 years without a single fatality. Back again across the face of the mountain to the third spur southeast of Wellington. Following this contour around, we pass close by what is going to be the western portal of the original Cascade Tunnel. Forward around the curve near the base of the mountains and into Wellington. Mark returns to the passenger car and the rear engine is detached. Wellington consists of little more than 3 spur tracks built on an artificial flat of tunnel building debris. A large engine man's bunkhouse on the flat and some shanties and small houses on the bank of a small creek. West of the creek was the depot, the section house, and the roadmaster's house. On the slope behind were the Bailiff's Hotel and a tavern called Fogg Brothers Restaurant. Construction of the original Cascade Tunnel began in 1897, 2 years after Mark Twain's visit. A massive 3-year round-the-clock effort with a huge labor force, 800 working, 800 sleeping, and 800 at the bar. Turnover rates often neared 50% a month. Drunkenness, violence, and prostitution. The wickedest town on earth. We traveled to Embro, a short distance from Wellington, and stopped for about 5 minutes. Rolled rocks down a precipice. Windy Point Tunnel was built to prevent trains from derailing around a particularly sharp curve. It was built in 1913 and was 1,221 feet long. On Thursday night, January 20th of 1916, more than 14 inches of wet snow fell on the Cascade Mountains and continued until noon on Friday. The temperature rose above freezing and it began to rain. It rained all Friday night. On Saturday morning, January 22nd, 1916, the westbound Great Northern Cascade Limited, train number 25 from Spokane, was standing on the railroad tracks on the upper grade above Korea, waiting for a section crew to remove a minor snowslide blocking the rails. At 7:15 a.m., workmen had removed the snow and debris that was covering the tracks, and the train was signaled to proceed. At that moment, an avalanche swept down Windy Mountain and struck the Cascade Limited broadside. 3 rail cars were taken from the middle of the train, the engines and other cars remaining on the rails. The day coach, the dining car, were carried over the embankment and tumbled toward the lower grade of the horseshoe curve. The sleeping car was on its side, one end hanging precariously over the embankment. The dining car stopped sliding partway down the hillside and caught fire. The day coach, a steel car, was taken all the way down to the lower tracks and was covered with snow and debris, approximately 80 feet. The section crew, already at the scene, immediately rescued the passengers from inside the sleeping car. Several had suffered minor injuries, but there were no fatalities. A search of the dining car yielded 3 injured and 2 dead passengers. Although hurt and disoriented, the 5 dining car employees managed to escape on their own. Rescuing passengers from the day coach was difficult, as it had disappeared under several feet of snow. It took workers 30 minutes to cautiously descend to the car's location, and over an hour of digging through the pile of compacted snow and debris to uncover one end. The job was risky. Deep banks and drifts of snow on the mountainside were unstable and posed an immediate threat to the rescuers. But undaunted, they hacked through the roof of the car with axes and worked as quickly as possible to bring out the passengers. It took 6 hours to get everyone out of the car. During the rescue operation, another avalanche occurred near Embro, demolishing more than 400 feet of snowshed. Well, we're off the mountain, arrived near Scenic, and head on down the canyon along the Tye River towards Skycomish. Scenic Hot Springs has been known since the 1880s, when it was discovered by rail workers constructing the original rail route over Stevens Pass. The actual discovery of the springs is generally credited to Stevens and Haskell. The nearest Indian tribe was the Skycomish people, who populated the area now known as Index, and rarely traveled further east than the valleys around the town of Skycomish, mainly along the North Fork of the Skycomish River. The inland people, although named for the Skycomish Indians, name derived from native word Skyk, meaning inland, and Mish, meaning people, little evidence exists of native habitation near the current town site. The tribe's territory was along the Skycomish River, but winter villages were located further downstream, near the present towns of Monroe, Index, and Gold Bar. Native peoples most likely used the area surrounding Skycomish for temporary campsites during hunting and berry gathering seasons. The arrival of Euro-American settlers to the region in the 1850s introduced smallpox and other fatal diseases to many of the western Washington tribes, and early estimates of the number of Skycomish Indians vary, but by the end of the century only a few hundred remained. Although they were one of the tribes who signed the Point Elliott Treaty in 1855 and were assigned to the reservation along Puget Sound, a native village of 240 people was still in existence near Gold Bar as late as 1900. During the construction of the 3 alignments of the Great Northern Route, Japanese workers used the hot springs at the sources. On completion of the switchback lines over Stevens Pass, an upscale sanatorium and hotel, the Scenic Hot Springs Hotel, was built, and the hot springs water piped 2.5 miles down the mountain to the hotel, where it was reheated to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. The hotel was a luxury resort for the rich and famous, and white, from Seattle. The actual springs remain the purview of non-white railroad laborers. During those early days, the hotel and later the burgeoning community around it were variously called Madison Hot Springs and Scenic Hot Springs. The hotel was torn down in 1929 to make room for the new Cascade Railroad Tunnel under Stevens Pass. The Upper Ty River flows through a steep, narrow, and densely forested valley. Below Surprise Creek, where we start following it downstream, the Ty's Valley alternately widens and narrows. There are dense mixed deciduous and conifer forests in the valley bottoms and thick conifer forests on the valley sides. Much of the lower elevation forests have been logged at least once now. Old growth forests are found mainly along the higher tributaries. Above Deception Creek, the Ty River has a steep gradient and a confined channel resulting in a nearly continuous series of steep cascades and small waterfalls. Downstream, near its mouth, the Ty's gradient lessens and its channel widens. The valley becomes more broad and flat. The river becomes somewhat braided in this stretch with numerous channel splits. There are many logs and other types of large woody debris in this part of the river. The final mile of the Ty has a steeper gradient with cascades alternating with deep pools. Nearly all the Ty River tributaries are high mountain streams with steep gradients, some entering the Ty's Valley from hanging valleys, plunging down high waterfalls. John Maloney was 33 years old at the time he met John F. Stevens, the only one of 5 boys in his family to go west. Maloney labored in mines, prospected in at least 4 states, operated a copper claim in Utah for 8 years, and went on to Alaska, where he floated the Yukon River to the sea in a moose skin canoe looking for copper. Since it was too late in the year to go back inland, he took passage on a steamer to Seattle. After his job as an axeman on a survey crew out of Bellingham ran out, he moved on to the head of Lake Chelan, where he located a ranch. By the time he met John Stevens, Maloney was a experienced wilderness traveler with an eye for opportunity. When Stevens chose to locate the Great Northern Railway along the South Fork of the Skykomish River, Maloney recognized his main chance. He staked a claim along the wide, flat stretch of river bottom along the route the rails would take in 1891 and began to clear land. He knew the building of the railroad would require all manner of support systems and positioned himself to provide them. The place he claimed became Skykomish.